when I started out, everything was happening with anonymous accounts in some internet forums. We didn't even have social media to exchange ideas or learnings. Back then, SEO was often dominated by one smart person doing something, maybe having some freelancers work for them. And nowadays, for almost any serious keyword, you will find 10 large companies in the Google top 10.
What tools are you personally using on a day-to-day basis for SEO purposes?
I use Systrix. I think it's the best tool out there, at least in Europe, to get like a broad overview over some other websites, some trends.
They use actually ChatGPT as a search engine, but not using Google anymore. So do you think there's kind of a shift from people thinking that LLMs might be smarter than Google?
Users who know very little about LLMs trust them completely and just use them. But the more users know about them and know about the limitations, the less they trust them.
All right. Today we'll talk about generative AI optimization, ladies and gentlemen, and I have a very special guest today, namely Malte, who is an expert in this field. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Very cool. Can you give the audience a little bit of a background, like what is your actual expertise in the field of SEO/GAIO?
Sure. I've been doing SEO for, 15 years, 20 years, I think almost now. No, yeah, actually for 20 years. And I'm currently head of SEO at Idealo, one of the largest, probably the largest price comparison website network in Europe. And I first contact with machine learning I had at university, actually, when I studied computer science and learned about neural networks and these kinds of things. I also did some natural language processing stuff at university. Then I forgot about the topic for a while. And then I joined Searchmetrics, where I worked for 5 years. And amongst other things, we built a content optimization software that used deep learning and approaches like word2vec that actually later also became relevant for LLMs. And yeah, that's my background in the topic.
Yeah. How did you first get in touch with SEO in the first place? I mean, you studied computer science, right? Like, why SEO? I mean, you could have studied anything. But what attracted you to the topic of SEO?
That was long before I went to university. That was when I was like 14 years old. I had an internet forum, like PHP BB2, very simple to talk to friends at school or from school. And at some point, somebody registered in the forum whom I hadn't told the domain name. And I was like, how did this person find us? And he told me, yeah, I just Googled name of my hometown plus internet forum, and then I started looking up like PageRank and how to rank, and that's how I got sucked into it.
Yeah. You've been doing it for 20 years, Malte. How did the landscape of SEO change in the recent years, especially now with the uprise of the search generative engine, which I think is still in beta, but they're rolling it out to more people at the moment. How did that change from your perspective?
Everything changed, I would say. Like when I started out, everything was happening with anonymous accounts in some internet forums. We didn't even have social media to exchange ideas or learnings. It all felt very undergroundy, and there were lots of like self-taught people. And then the whole industry became a bit more professional. Google started also having a bit more professional outreach towards webmasters. Like the term webmaster existed back then. Nowadays, this term doesn't really exist anymore. And back then, SEO was often dominated by one smart person doing something, maybe having some freelancers work for them. And nowadays, for almost any serious keyword, you will find 10 large companies in the Google top 10. Because the times are over when one person can trick the Google algorithm into ranking them for a search like Hotels Berlin or something like that.
Yeah, because I'm also doing of course I'm not an expert as you are, Malte, but I'm also doing a bit of SEO on the side. Like, how is it for you? Like, there's always this debate of writing for people versus writing for search engines. Like, how does the balance for you look like, and what is kind of the best balance or like the best distribution in terms of like writing for Google, for example, and writing for people?
Ich denke, das können wir rausschneiden.
Yeah.
In the past, I was writing for search engines, and I told my editors to write for search engines. Nowadays, I was always write for users. you have to make sure that the search engine can crawl your page, can render it, can index it, but you should write for users. You cannot trick search engines anymore, and you can rank by writing for search engines. You can rank short term, but then the search engine will measure with user signals, with bounce back to SERP, with very low brand search volume, etc., that users are not happy on your site. So nowadays, it's just right for users because that is what search engines try to understand. Are you writing good content for users and do they like it?
Okay. Do you have some kind of best practices? I mean, there's obviously SEO best practice in terms of character limit and H1, H2, and so on and so forth. But are there some best practices that most people ignore, even though they might be following best practices?
I think the problem is following best practices like
Okay.
a fixed word count.
Yeah.
I really think you should think about what is the user intent or the user problem and what content format and what content length is needed for that. And if someone is searching for something very simple, a very short text answer might be enough. And there might not even be a structure or anything. It might be just one sentence, like opening hours of a restaurant or something. And there is content that is very complex where probably a wall of text will never solve it. Maybe you need a slideshow, a picture gallery, a video, a short video, whatever it is, and then just do that. And yeah, some of that will not work very well for Google. Like if you create for any random restaurant in the city a page with its opening hours, probably Google will never send you traffic because they already have that information. But you would also not satisfy users by writing a wall of text under it. You might rank a little bit better temporarily, but I would really think about user needs for everything, and I would throw out most old school SEO best practices.
Yeah. How would you do it? Like, let's say you're competing against someone in your landscape. I mean, it's highly competitive, right? Like, how would you approach, for example, keyword analysis, keyword gap analysis, all that kind of stuff? Is there some things that have changed over the last years?
I think until very recently, it was still possible to just look at high search volume, low keyword difficulty keywords in the long tail and write about it on your niche site blog. But Google really ended that with the updates we had in March. So also here, I would think about what is my topic. I don't know if it's stand-up paddling. Then I would write about all the things that are relevant for stand-up paddling. And then depending on my target audience, that can be all the beginner questions that people have, like what board to buy, what pedal to buy, where to train, how to find a trainer. Or if my audience are enthusiasts and experts, then it's probably covering the results of every event. And Google is getting better and better at understanding if you actually cover a topic and are recognized as a brand and as an authority, or if you just throw content to target some long tail keywords at Google and don't actually have a coherent content strategy and don't offer your readers anything that is coherent.
Yeah, that makes sense. Would you say you approach SEO different in the different stages of the funnel? So from top to bottom, is it the same kind of process, the procedure, or would you say it's different in every stage of the funnel?
I mean, some basics are the same. Find out where there's demand and what users want and what competitors are doing, and then be better. Of course, when you operationalize it, there are differences, right? If you are top of funnel, you don't really have conversions to measure what is good content. You need some form of soft metrics, what to write about and what actually reached the target audience and what didn't. Because you can write about the wrong thing and you can still reach people and they like it, but they might not be your target audience. And the further you go down the funnel, the more you have hard conversion goals to understand if you actually created good content, if you improved it or not. So I think the lack of hard conversion KPIs is the biggest difference the higher you go up the funnel.
What tools are you personally using on a day-to-day basis for SEO purposes?
I use Systrix. I think it's the best tool out there, at least in Europe, to get like a broad overview over some other websites, some trends. And then, to be honest, I use a lot of internal tools or combinations of tools that we have built locally.
Ah, I see. Okay. So when we go back to the topic of AI, right? Like there's this whole, there's different I would call acronyms like LLMO and AIO and Generative Engine Optimization. Like, how do you distinguish these terms, and what do they actually mean in the context of AI plus SEO?
I think all these terms means the same, like IO, GAIO, GEO, LLMO. The goal is always to describe the process of I want to rank well or I want to be in the answer. And at the end, it's the same as SEO. The acronym makes no sense because also SEOs, they don't optimize the search engine. They optimize a website for the search engine.
Yeah.
And all of these terms try to capture the same. And there's no agreement yet which term will be used. Some of these terms have problems like GEO, Generative Engine Optimization. It's already a word. It's already used. Also IO and GAIO, you will find other stuff on Google often when searching for it. So yeah, there's the question is still out there. The debate is still open which term we will actually end up using.
Yeah. So what does it actually mean to quote unquote hack, let's say, an LLM for your own purposes? Let's say, for example, what I imagine is, I'm not sure if this is even possible right now. Let's say you have a competitor and you're typing something into, for example, ChatGPT, basically training that model to learn something negative about your competitor and learning more positive things about your own company. Like, is that possible nowadays?
In a limited faction, yes. You have basically two, I would say, attack vectors. There's like the core LLM, the foundational model. And that's really difficult because something like GPT-3, Llama, these models are already trained. Either you were in the training data or not. And you can only think about how can I get into new models? How can I influence them? And the other option is when an answer engine creates an answer, they normally don't just use the LLM. They also use something called retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, however you wish to pronounce it. It's an approach where you gather some live data, either structured data from a database, something like a Google Knowledge Graph, or also unstructured data. And there you have a lot more attack vectors. But let's go back to the core LLM. If we look at GPT-3, it's known what it was trained on, right? There's Common Crawl in there. So if you are present in Common Crawl, that's already good. They used books. Okay, like if you are a state actor, you can probably publish a lot of books and write in there that, I don't know, oil is the best thing ever, or that sugar is very healthy. And then maybe you can influence some opinions, but it's not really something for one company or one keyword. Wikipedia is in there, and it has a triple weight. So Wikipedia is only 1% of the input for GPT-3, but it is weighted like 3 times higher. So if you are in Wikipedia, if you're referenced in Wikipedia, if something positive is written about you in Wikipedia, that's probably good, or that's definitely good. And then there's web text too. It's a document corpus based on Reddit. So basically they took every link shared on Reddit that had at least 3 upvotes. And this is only 4% of the input, but 22% of the weight. So if your website or websites talking about you positively were shared on Reddit, there's a good likelihood that you had some form of advantage in GPT-3. And probably in the future, similar data sources will be used. But of course, they will be cleaned and sanitized because the people training LLMs, they're not stupid. They know there are SEOs out there trying to get into Reddit, trying to get into Wikipedia. And I mean, they use Reddit and Wikipedia because of the human moderation. That is actually a good defense against people who try to manipulate. But they will use other mechanics as well, because if you and I now start our own subreddit and we invite 15 friends and we almost always upvote each other and share all the links to our websites, I mean, some people are probably doing this already, and OpenAI and Facebook, etc., they know this, so they will not just blindly use the Reddit data. And then coming back to the RAG, to the live approaches or live generations, there's a patent from Google that is very likely used for SGE or similar, where they take the top X relevant documents and they use them to augment the LLM response. And like one thing you can do with RAG is, for example, you can counter the problem of unreliable sources. Because in your LLM, you probably have some unreliable sources. You probably have, I don't know, a Breitbart in there or an Alex Jones or whatever, some fake news, and you can't get them out unless you retrain the whole model, which costs millions, tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
But with RAG, you can supply in the moment where you generate the answer a couple of trusted documents. Or if you have unclear terminology, terms like golf or bark, they can mean different things. Like bark, are we talking about a tree or a dog? Or golf, is it the car? Is it the sport? Is it the geographical phenomenon or the geographical occurrence? And if you know the context of the question, you can again supply some documents that talk only about this, and then the LLM is not confused. Or terms like solicitor and trainer, they mean a different thing from an American user and a British user. So if you know the location of the user in the moment when they ask the question to the LLM, you can use RAG to supply some documents that are in the local language. And so there are a lot of reasons to do this, right? Also, you get live data in. And if you use structured data, you get something in like, I don't know, let's say I ask, what should I do in New York today? Probably it would be smart for the LLM to know the weather that we have today, to know if it should advise indoor or outdoor activities. And with RAG, it can pull from some form of knowledge graph or weather API the live weather data. And the interesting part is when documents are pulled, relevant documents, because there I can do SEO again. How relevant documents are selected for SGE, for example, from Google is different from the organic ranking. There are 8 different studies nowadays. They have different levels of agreements, but maybe it's just 10% of the top 10, maybe it's 50% of the top 10 documents, but the rest is then coming from somewhere else. And there we can do SEO. We can reverse engineer it. There's a big study from Wanli and ZipTie. They found out that for these live generations, SGE prefers lightweight websites, which makes sense, right? Because it's not a long indexation process. It's like pulling the documents, doing the analysis, generating the response within a few seconds. So being lightweight, not using a lot of JavaScript, not having a long rendering time to execute JavaScript, execute CSS. These things are important. Page load time under 500 milliseconds is important.
Yeah.
Also having an executive summary is important, because then the LLM often or the SGE specifically, just pulls a sentence from your executive summary, maybe modifies it very slightly, and puts it in the answer box on Google and then lists you as a source. So there are some factors that we know, how to make our documents more likely to be quoted by SGE and then listed as a source. And this is probably similar in other answer engines as well. There's also Perplexity AI, where a group of scientists did a big study. Like it was a group of people from different universities in the US and India. And they found out if they make the writing style more authoritative, more easy to understand, and more fluent, they were more likely to rank highly in Perplexity. Or they adding statistics, adding quotes, properly citing your sources, adding words, all of this also help to rank in Perplexity. So again, they could reverse engineer it. So, and they are not SEOs. So in the future, whatever answer engine will become big, is it Perplexity? Is it ChatGPT? Is it SGE? Is it Bing using some version of GPT? We don't know which one it will be, but we already know that we can reverse engineer it. So for state actors and for very, very big organizations, like lobbying groups for oil, attacking the core LLM and injecting something in the training data, I think can be a worthwhile endeavor. Everybody else, just look at where there is live generation or generation of an answer that needs some form of live data, and then try to try to manipulate that or try to get yourself in there as a source. And then, of course, we also need to differentiate. Do I want my website to be the source to get a click? Like if I'm a retailer or publisher? Or am I a brand that's producing a product, and do I want to influence how my product is perceived? Like, am I Nike and I want Google or other systems to learn that Nike makes the best running shoes and that Adidas running shoes are uncool, right? If I want to do that, optimizing my own website is not enough. I need to optimize content or inject content on other websites that are trusted. And I can't just write 100 Wikipedia articles, right? But maybe with clever PR, I can get an article on Forbes. I can just buy the article.
Yeah.
But maybe with clever PR, I can get the article on CNN, on Fox, on NBC, on some other news publishers. So there really digital PR, outreach, branding becomes super, super important to change how LLMs perceive my brand or a competitor's brand.
Yeah, that kind of is exactly the opposite how people think about AI, Malte, right? Because usually they thought like once like GPT 3.5 came and they were all using GPT, they were thinking, I'm just going to give it a topic and it's going to write a blog post about my brand, about my product, about my service, whatever. And they just thought, hey, I can copy and paste this to my blog and it will just rank eventually. But no, like all the points that you mentioned makes it much more difficult to actually rank properly in these search engines as well as LLMs. So there is kind of a big list of check marks you have to actually hit to actually say, okay, my content might actually be relevant for the search engines. So it's not only using AI, but it's kind of AI plus human plus expertise plus a bit of SEO knowledge plus LLM knowledge. So it's a huge area of expertise that someone needs to have.
Yeah, what you just described, like just taking the blog post from ChatGPT, right? It's so easy and so cheap. Yeah. Everybody can do this. And if you switch from ChatGPT to Claude, you can even get the cost down by a factor of 10, 90%. So everybody can now register 100 domains and write 100 blog posts every day on each of these websites. It only costs a couple $1,000s. And no search engine wants to rank that. And no LLM provider wants to train their LLM on that or wants that to use to generate their live answers where they need live data. So yeah, the bar is high. There's a reason why Google had this perspectives filter for a while. Now they have the forums tab or forums filter in the US. They want to surface answers written by real humans and ideally verifiable humans. So not just there's a username Malte Landwehr, which everybody can use, right? You could create an account Malte Landwehr tomorrow and let an AI write on it, but somehow verify it with relations to social profiles, these kinds of things. If you look at Google News in the US or Google Discover, Google is sometimes now testing to write the author name as big as the magazine where the news article is published, because they understand that there's a need from humans to read from other humans sometimes, not from AI. And there will be some very smart people who have tremendous success with AI-generated content and SEO. I know a couple of people who have hundreds of thousands of visitors per day just by rewriting content from other websites with AI. But it's not a sustainable tactic. It's not a long-term approach. If you are a clever hacker living in your basement, you can do it, or living in your penthouse if you're successful. But if you are a real company that has to pay employees and be around for the next 20 years, 50 years, this approach is not working. Like any AI-written article can be written by your competitor. Yeah. And especially if you use a lazy prompt, like write an article on how to tie a tie, everybody can do that. The LLM already knows the answer because it wrote the article. Yeah. There's no need to ever surface your content ever again.
100%. It's kind of funny because there's this thread that I posted a while ago which says like everybody wants to create content using AI, but actually nobody wants to consume content created by AI. It's kind of exactly the opposite of what we actually perceive. Yeah, it's kind of funny. Yeah. Is there some other best practices or ways to maybe get traffic from LLMs? I mean, you mentioned expert interviews, quotes, testimonials, a pro-con list. Is there anything else you would mention?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is be perceived as the authority on the topic. um, anything around brand building, anything you can do to position yourself, either the person or your website, as an authority, as the market leader, as the main trusted source, can help you. Because then other websites regularly reference you, link to you, quote you, and all of this is part of the Common Crawl dataset, because Common Crawl is basically the internet.
Yeah.
And almost every LLM will to some degree use Common Crawl to be trained. So I think that is like the best thing you can probably do. Be an expert, talk about it. There are some people from this semantic SEO bubble who try to write in a certain style about themselves. Like, I would write in this style, like, I'm Malte Landwehr. Malte Landwehr is an SEO, full stop. Malte Landwehr is an experienced SEO in the AI optimization. Like, really writing as if you were writing instructions to a machine, like very simple, very boring. And you can find some SEOs writing like this in their articles. And I think actually they have some level of success, especially right now. But I feel like it's a cheap trick. Like, LLMs will pick up and realize that these people right now have too much influence on how the knowledge graph on LLMs are trained. But right now it seems to work to some degree. But I don't know if every target audience appreciates this writing style.
Yeah, definitely. What about adding more content? We talked about content, right? Adding more content is super easy, super cheap to create more content. How would you even generate unique keywords? Is it like you use tool like, I don't know, Ahrefs, SEMrush, whatever you might be using as a tool? But is there like deep learning or LLM models that help you kind of find unique keywords? Like, for example, Word2Vec that you mentioned earlier on?
Yeah, I mean, definitely you can use Word2Vec or even something simple like TF-IDF to look at the current Google top 10, top 20 ranking documents and see all the terms they are using. And then if 5 of these documents use a certain term and you are not using it, then probably there is a gap in your content, right? Because if 5 websites use this term, it probably means something. It has some form of relevance. It's
Yeah.
encoding a subtopic or an information. And there are many text optimization tools. I mean, there was such metrics content experience in the past that I personally worked on. I think Surfer SEO is a pretty common one. Also, SEMrush nowadays has a writing assistant or something like that. I have personally not used it. All of these tools can help with that, basically surfacing a gap in your content. You can also use LLMs, of course, for content that the LLM knows about. Like, you can give it your text and say, is there any gap that, I don't know, an uneducated reader would expect? Or is there any gap in my content that an expert would expect? And then you can try to add content based on that.
Yeah. Some of the tips, practical tips that you have given us in this podcast, Malte, are there so maybe some disclaimers or limitations in the sense of, for example, it only applies to specific systems? So, for example, we talked about Perplexity, ChatGPT, Claude, for example. Are there systems where these tricks might not work?
I mean, most of the times where we know a trick works, we only know it for one system. Like this GEO paper from scientists, it was only for Perplexity AI. So the writing style, the sources thingy, we only know it factually for Perplexity. And even there, they could show that it works on some topics, but not on others. And then things like the loading time, not using JavaScript, we only know this for SGE. I'm not aware of any study that has looked into this for any other answer engine. So yes, everything we know right now is often limited. Many of these things make sense. So you can probably transfer knowledge from one system to another, but it's often not factual.
Yeah. With all the tips, like, is there kind of a checklist, or how would you say SEO people approach or content writers approach this topic of SEO plus GAIO? Like, is there kind of a best practice or a way to approach this? Like, start simple. Like, how would you approach this if you're a complete newbie in that space?
I mean, most content writers, when they create content, they probably should not think about any kind of LLM, but about their reader. One best practice is the executive summary. LLMs seem to love it, to pick it up and then cite you as a source. And of course, I mean, this is not so much something for the content writer, more for the person who is in charge of the website overall. There are things that LLMs cannot do, and that is personal experiences. So if you have expert testimonial, if you have user reviews, have all of that on one side. And if you have a lot of user reviews, summarize them. That would be my main advice for how to create content that should perform well in an LLM first area where search engines no longer exist.
Yeah, that makes sense. Are there some ethical considerations or some things that could potentially go wrong? I mean, we talked about kind of hacking the algorithms to make competitors look bad. Is there anything else we should be aware of? And maybe some actions that we can take to prevent this for our own brand?
I think the people who train LLMs and build these foundational models, they have a high incentive to combat any and all manipulations. And I think companies like OpenAI have very smart people who deal with this. I don't think as a brand there's a lot you can do against a competitor trying to inject something negative about your brand into an LLM. Apart from building your brand, doing your digital PR, your outreach, making just sure you are talked about positively. Of course, if you look at society as a whole, there are all the same ethical problems you have in PR and in online reputation management. There are oil companies who will try to hide that they maybe didn't treat the environment so good all the time. There are interest groups that will try to convince you that sugar is healthy. And there are interest groups that will try to convince you that sugar is not healthy. And there are people who have strong opinions about gender, sexuality, religion. And of course they use PR campaigns already right now with maybe thousands of Reddit or Twitter accounts. And these people would be very stupid if they didn't try to also manipulate LLMs. And there is probably some form of risk for society. But I hope that the people working at OpenAI, etc., will try to, or will manage to identify such manipulations and will wipe them out of the training data.
Yeah. What do you think are some of the future trends? Now we talked about, obviously this is also a future trend. It's not really well established right now. Like barely anybody I know talks about GAIO and like LLM optimization. But do you think there will maybe, for example, also a shift in the job landscape? For example, there will be people 100% dedicated to only on LLM and optimizing LLMs, like not, you don't have the SEO person, the content writer, but you have someone in the company specifically focused on this specific niche or job?
I think it would sit in SEO because the overlap is so huge.
Yeah.
And SEOs have the perfect skill set for it, right? We know something about the technical side of websites and information retrieval. Good SEOs will also know a thing or two about digital PR, content marketing, how the internet can be crawled, and then also how to reverse engineer systems. So I think it will sit in SEO. And actually, everybody I talk to who's into manipulating LLMs is coming from an SEO background. I think it's a perfect match skill set wise.
How do you keep yourself personally up to date with the latest trends, maybe research in the field of GAIO?
For me, it's my Twitter feed. I'm just connected with other people, or my X feed, as I have to say nowadays. I'm connected to people who are dabbling in the same thing. I'm especially interested in it because I maintain an article that I always update when there's a new study on SGE, for example. So I updated it with 7 times now because there's now 8 studies. And that's why I just follow the space and stuff just arrives in my inbox or in my feed. And in terms of keeping up to date with LLMs, it's impossible. There's so much development. There are so many things. Unless you are a journalist who is covering the space, I don't think that anybody can actually keep up with everything. If you look at a website like Hugging Face, there are so many models nowadays. And there was a few months ago, this trend started to combine 2 models to generate a better output. So there are now so many crossover models that combine 2 models. There are so many projects trying to create training data, trying to recreate training data that is used by Meta or OpenAI and wasn't published. Nobody can keep up with everything. It's just impossible, and I don't even try. When a big trend occurs, that I realize at some point, but I don't try to keep up with everything, and I don't think anybody can.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Did we miss anything regarding GEO and all this kind of LLM topics that we've discussed in today's podcast, Malte?
I mean, we could talk about how realistic is it that it will actually become big. Because right now, search engines still answer the vast majority of internet searches, internet questions. And I think for some search terms, it will just make sense that every search engine switches to these kinds of answers. But we need to remember how much more expensive an LLM response is towards a simple information retrieval from an index and then ranking the documents. So I don't think that in 1 year there will be 100% LLM answers and 0% search engines. I think there will be a very long period where we have both. I think that's important to keep in mind. So if you have, I don't know, 100 points of attention for SEO, you should probably switch between 1 and 10 of these attention points to LLM. And these attention points, they can be headcounts, it can be budget, it can be your personal time, like whatever you are as a company or at whatever stage you are. But you probably shouldn't switch 50% of your attention now to LLMs because SEO is still driving a lot of traffic for many businesses.
Have you seen any change in terms of user behavior? I'm not aware of any statistics at the moment, like from the top of my head, but I feel that a lot of people use LLMs kind of as a search engine. Like they even type in the query, like, I don't know, give me the best recipe on, I don't know, how to make pasta, whatever. They use actually ChatGPT as a search engine, but not using Google anymore. They just delve straight into ChatGPT. So do you think there's kind of a shift from people thinking that LLMs might be smarter than Google and just not even going to Google anymore, but straight into LLMs, which kind of reinforces the thing or the message of you should actually be spending more time on optimizing LLMs?
I mean, if you look at usage data via a website like SimilarWeb, then Google is still a gazillion times bigger than all these chatbots. And I recently read a study that users who know very little about LLMs trust them completely and just use them. But the more users know about them and know about the limitations, the less they trust them. And if you use something like GPT-4, oftentimes the answer is not instant. Like oftentimes you have to wait. And I use it in my search journey because there are some questions where it's just better than Google. But also there are times where I'm used to typing something into Google and seeing the answer immediately. Like, I don't know, what's the capital of Burkina Faso or how many people live in Cologne? And I just get the answer a lot quicker than from GPT-4. So I'm reluctant to say that I'm shifting like completely. For me, it's just certain terms. And if you look at usage data, it's happening to a degree, but it's not the big bang where suddenly everybody is using ChatGPT. What I'm seeing is that people are switching from Google to Bing. I believe since in the last 12 months, depends on which country you look at, but there's a shift of like maybe 3 percentage points in this direction in both the US and Germany. I don't monitor any other markets for this, where people start using Bing more than Google. But it's unclear if that is because Bing had the chatbot earlier. It could also just be that people have become less and less happy with the wall of advertisement that Google is becoming nowadays.
Yeah, let's see. I mean, Sam Altman even said like people are super impressed by GPT-4, but let's see if they bring out GPT-5, what shift that will bring for sure. But anyway, Malte, thank you so much. It was super, super insightful for me. And I think the audience also will really like the podcast. Maybe there will be a second episode in the future. Who knows, depending on how much research is going on in that field. But thank you so much for being in the podcast today.
Thanks for having me and asking interesting questions.